In 2033, something really unprecedented is set to happen in Switzerland. About 170 Swiss citizens who live in this, postcard-perfect alpine village are going to be required to leave their homes.
And not for a short time either. Indefinitely.
Exactly. And it's not because of a climate crisis or a shifting glacier. It's because of a security problem that's been sleeping right under their feet for, 78 years now?
We're doing a deep dive into the village of Mitholz. It's located in the Bernese Oberland, and the problem there is, well, it's not small. We're talking about 3,500 tons of World War II munitions.
All buried in a collapsing military depot, basically inside the mountain that looms over the village.
Yeah, and the sheer scale of the project to clean this up is just mind-boggling.
It's currently the single largest, most complex bomb disposal operation in Swiss history. The budget is approaching 2.59 billion Swiss francs.
And the human cost is measured not just in money, but in time. The residents of Mitholz are facing at least 12 years of forced exile from their homes.
It's such an incredible paradox, a sleeping threat from a war that Switzerland didn't even officially fight.
So our mission today is to trace this whole story back to the catastrophic night that created the problem in the first place, and then really unpack the chemistry that turned this old depot into an unpredictable time bomb.
And that story begins on December 19th, 1947.
Let's set the scene. It's almost Christmas, it's bitterly cold outside, -5 degrees Celsius. The village of Mitholz is completely quiet, everyone's asleep.
And right above them, hidden deep inside the limestone mountain, was one of the country's biggest ammunition depots.
This place was massive. We're talking 6 underground galleries, each one about 150 meters long, just carved straight into the rock.
And what was inside them?
They were packed. 7,000 tons of munitions, aerial bombs, artillery shells, mines, grenades.
7,000 tons?
Yeah, to put that in perspective, that's about the equivalent of 700 railway wagons worth of ammunition, all just sitting inside that mountain.
So on that night, just before 11 o'clock, the station master at the nearby railway access tunnel sees something.
He does. He notices these small flames flickering at the tunnel entrance and hears this deep, ominous, rumbling sound coming from inside the mountain.
He barely had any time to react.
About 30 minutes later, the mountain just erupted. The first big explosion hits. It was powerful enough to rip the heavy armored doors right off their hinges and completely level the station building.
And the station master and his son, who were investigating.
They were killed instantly.
But that was just the beginning.
Oh yeah, 5 minutes after that, the second explosion hit. And this blast was so powerful that seismographs in Zurich, which is 150 kilometers away, registered the shockwave.
You can't even imagine what that must have felt like in the valley right below.
And then, just past midnight, came the third and most violent explosion.
How big was this one?
The blast was just immense. Flames shot 150 meters high out of the cliff face. And the shockwave triggered a catastrophic collapse.
A collapse of the cliff itself.
Yes. 250,000 cubic meters of rock, rubble, and of course, unstable ordnance came tumbling down the mountain right into the village.
The villagers must have been terrified.
Pure terror. They fled their homes, running barefoot through the snow in their pajamas, just trying to escape the fire and the massive boulders crashing down around them.
And when it was all over?
The devastation was horrific. 9 people were dead, and that included 4 children. Over 100 buildings were either destroyed or heavily damaged.
But the real legacy, the ticking clock, was the material left inside the mountain.
Exactly. The 3,500 tons of unexploded, unstable material that remained in those collapsed galleries. That's the problem we're still talking about today.
Locally, they just call that night the Chnitch.
The Chnitch, yeah. And it's remarkable to think that this event, in a neutral country, was actually one of the largest non-nuclear explosions recorded anywhere in the world during that time.
And it created a problem that has just been simmering for decades. So why there? Why did the Swiss army pick this specific isolated spot to store so much firepower?
To understand that, you have to go back to the military strategy of the 1940s. By 1940, Switzerland was completely surrounded by Axis powers.
Right, which led General Guisan to develop the National Redoubt strategy.
Exactly. The plan wasn't to defend the populated flatlands, which were vulnerable. The plan was to retreat into the Alps.
The mountains themselves would become a fortress.
A massive, impregnable fortress or redoubt. The idea was the Swiss army could hold out there and resist an invasion for years.
Which meant they needed to turn the Alps into a network of bunkers, tunnels.
And critically secret, highly secure ammunition depots. They had to be safe from bombing and close to railway lines for logistics.
And Mitholz was seen as perfect for this.
It was. The towering flue cliff offered solid limestone for tunneling, and it was right next to the rail line. Between 1941 and 1945, it became one of the most vital hubs in that whole Alpine defense system.
So after the war, the munitions just stayed there.
They just stayed put. Destroying it all was considered too expensive, too difficult logistically. So the 7,000 tons were simply left where they were.
Which led directly to the 1947 tragedy. It's just devastating that a cost-saving measure ended up costing lives.
It is.
So why did it take a few years for those munitions to detonate? Let's get into the chemistry of what turned the rest of that debris into the problem they face now.
Well, experts never definitively proved what the initial trigger was back in 47. But the consensus really points toward chemical instability in the detonators themselves.
What were they made of?
They used primary explosives like lead azide and mercury fulminate.
And the key factor here is the environment inside those mountain tunnels.
Right, it's humid. And over the years, that moisture seeped into the galleries and caused those chemicals to react with the copper shell casings on the ammunition. So this wasn't a static situation. Things were actively transforming.
And what did that reaction create?
It created a compound called copper azide, or in German, Kupferazide. And this is where the danger just increases exponentially.
How so?
Copper azide is intensely unstable. I mean, we're talking about an explosive that is far more sensitive than standard TNT or even dynamite.
So it doesn't need heat or a flame to go off?
Not at all. The sources confirm it can be triggered by the slightest bit of friction, an unexpected vibration, or even just a small piece of rock falling inside those collapsed galleries.
So the threat isn't just the leftover bombs, it's this highly sensitized dust that's coating everything.
Precisely. And you combine that chemical volatility with nearly 78 years of ground settlement and rock movement. And those remaining 3,500 tons have turned into what experts grimly call the explosive pudding.
Explosive pudding. That is a terrifyingly descriptive phrase.
It is. It's this unpredictable, volatile mix where one tiny vibration could potentially set off another chain reaction.
So they're essentially dealing with a mountain filled with the chemical equivalent of a giant, friction-sensitive landmine made of rock and dust.
That's a very good way to put it. And, this raises a really important question.
Why did people keep living there, right on top of it, for so long?
Exactly. After the 47 disaster, the village wasn't abandoned. It was actively rebuilt.
I read that the Bernese Heritage Authority, the Heimatschutz, actually financed the reconstruction.
They did. They rebuilt it in the traditional style of the Frutigen Valley. It was meant to be a model village, a symbol of resilience, with patriotic carvings on the new houses.
And at the same time, the military rebuilt the parts of the depot they could get to and just kept using it.
They did. For storage, as an army pharmacy, seemingly accepting the risk. And it's the Army's risk assessments from that period that are, in hindsight, just shocking.
Right. In 1949 and then again in 1986, they investigated and concluded that, yes, a new explosion was possible, but the risk was acceptable.
Acceptable. And that any potential damage would be minimal.
So for almost 70 years, the people of Mitholz lived with that official assurance. The establishment decided that avoiding the huge cost of a cleanup was worth the acceptable risk to 170 people.
And you have to wonder, was it incompetence, or was it a deliberate financial and political choice to just kick the can down the road? It was easier to live with the known problem than fund the unknown complexity of the solution.
Until it became scientifically impossible to ignore.
That moment came very recently, in 2018. The Army was thinking about a new project, installing an ultra-secure military data center inside the old, accessible galleries.
And for something like that, you need a modern gold standard risk assessment.
You do. And when modern experts finally analyzed those 3,500 tons using sophisticated methods that fully accounted for the copper azide formation, the truth was undeniable.
The announcement came on June 18, 2018. Federal Counselor Guy Parmelin stood up and said the risk was, and I quote, unacceptable.
They realized they had seriously underestimated the danger for generations. And there was no way to mitigate that risk other than full removal of the munitions and a permanent evacuation of the village.
The sense of betrayal in the community must have been immense.
It was. One resident, Annies Grossen, whose family was directly affected by the 47 tragedy, said they had always treated the depot as a sad memory, a moment of history. Then came the news. That history was now demanding their homes.
So now the focus shifts from history to just massive, expensive logistics. The Mitholz project is now the largest military construction site in Swiss history.
With a 2.59 billion Swiss franc budget and a timeline of 25 years total.
The biggest challenge isn't just removing the munitions, is it? It's keeping everyone safe while they do it.
That's the primary concern. The National Road to Kandersteg and the vital Lurchburg railway line run directly past the blast zone.
And you can't just shut down major transportation routes for 2 decades.
No. So what they're doing is building a colossal protective structure. A 570-meter-long reinforced concrete gallery that will run directly over the road and the rail line.
And it has to be strong enough to withstand a worst-case scenario blast during the work.
Exactly. And for the work zone itself, they're building what is basically a giant containment shell, sort of a sarcophagus.
Like at Chernobyl.
The principle is similar, yes. It's a physical shield that lets them do close, robotic work in a hyper-dangerous zone where you can't really have humans.
So how do they actually plan to remove the material inside this shell?
It is incredibly meticulous. For about 10 years, specialized robots and remote operators are going to sort through all that collapsed rubble. Not by the ton, but grain by grain, shell by shell.
To avoid any friction at all.
To avoid any friction or vibration that could trigger the copper azide. On top of that, there's the environmental contamination.
I was going to ask about that.
The whole site is riddled with pollutants. Mercury, lead, antimony, TNT residues. It's an officially registered contaminated site.
Which means every single bit of soil and rock they dig out has to be specially treated.
Every cubic meter. And, speaking of contamination, there's a fascinating and quite worrying historical footnote to all this from the first cleanup attempt.
What's that?
Back in 1948, the Federal Council decided to get rid of some of the recovered munitions from Mitholz, not by destroying them, but by sinking them.
Sinking them where?
In the lakes. Which is why today, 1,500 tons of Mitholz munitions are sitting at the bottom of Lake Thun, where they pose a completely different long-term environmental problem.
Unbelievable. So while the engineers handle the logistics, the community has to deal with the emotional reality.
In early 2033, the security perimeter goes up, and the residents have to leave for a minimum of 12 years.
The personal stories are just heartbreaking.
They are. One man, Walter Luthi, had to sell his family house to the Defense Department. He said that on the day he handed over the keys, he felt like he was burying 257 years of family history.
And what about the farmers?
That's another huge challenge. The Kunze family, for example, has farmed that specific land for 4 generations. How do you relocate a generational livelihood that depends on those specific fields right near the depot?
It's nearly impossible.
And the tragic irony is that this model village, which was rebuilt with such pride after 1947 as a symbol of endurance, now has to disappear for a second time.
Because a 12-year absence, that breaks a community. Kids who leave as toddlers will come back as adults. The elderly might not come back at all. The Mitholz they knew will be gone.
The possibility of returning in 2045 is, sadly, very theoretical.
So when we step back and look at this whole story, what does Mitholz really represent?
Well, that 2.59 billion Swiss franc price tag is the immediate cost, but it's also the cost of 70 years of, you could say, negligence and delayed action. It's the final bill for a war Switzerland managed to avoid.
It's a profound reminder that these big strategic military decisions, like the National Redoubt, they don't just fade away. Their chemical legacies are long-lasting, dangerous, and incredibly expensive to deal with decades later.
The cleanup of the Mitholz explosive pudding should be done by 2045, and the hope is that the community can return.
But those 1,500 tons of munitions at the bottom of Lake Thun will just continue to sleep there.
Posing a different, ongoing environmental and safety question for future generations. That threat isn't going away, it's just in a different place.